Hi, I'm Irma Velasquez. I'm a member of the Deep Living Institute team. And with us today is Brian Mitchell Walker, another member of our team. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Irma. How are you?
Good. So today we're going to be talking to you about racial justice. And can you tell us a little bit about how you got into this field?
Sure. And I will say it was kind of a varied road, but the largest part was I was working as a volunteer with an organization in Canada for uh, GLBTQ, all the initials for all the variations of sexual orientation and gender identity. And I was working with a staff person of the United Church of Canada, um, our general counsel, who was a strong ally in our work. And she came to me saying, Brian, you know how important allies are. And I went, absolutely. Uh, we wouldn't have been able to do a lot of the work, well, even including uh, my husband and I getting married and being able to adopt children was a lot of work done through allies. And she asked me if I'd be an ally in racial justice work as a white ally. And I still thank this woman, Alprise Lamonji, every day because she also challenged me on my white privilege. She also really supported me, enabling me to go to conferences like the White Privilege Conference, which is an anti-racism conference. And we started doing workshops on power and privilege. And then within the United Church of Canada, it became a requirement that all ministry personnel take a racial justice training. Uh, and so 2 sessions were developed, and I've been part of that team since 2012. And around that same time, I was also the co-chair of the National Racial Justice, Gender Justice Advisory Committee for the United Church of Canada. And yeah, and it also comes with my background as a teacher in inner city Toronto, where in my kindergarten classes, between the 2 classes, sometimes I had up to 60 students. And in those times, I had more than 50 countries represented. So I learned a lot from my kids, and I learned a lot of the ways that they were mistreated. And after doing a lot of the work around building my awareness and how we teach racism, I'm aware that I was part of that within my teaching, within my assimilation to new Canadians, that didn't really fully honor the students in my class. So there was lots of good things I did, but there are things that I wish I would have done differently now.
So, so Brian, tell me, how do one become, let me see, who gets to be white?
Oh, that's a good question. And it's really changed through the years. Like, the truth is, the division of race as we know it, didn't really develop until the 1400s. And there was more kind of fights and things based on geography, where you came from, etc., not on the color of your skin. And there's no scientific proof of this classes of race. Like, we are the human race. And yet, this structure of racism, this social construct has been created. And in that social construct is the construct of whiteness. And again, like, my skin is lighter, but it's definitely not white. And whiteness changes through the years. Who gets to be white changes. And I come from the province of Saskatchewan in Canada, and at the time of settling it in and pushing the Indigenous people onto reserves, um, there were Irish people that were coming, which is part of my heritage. And there are letters that said, well, maybe we shouldn't let those people in because they'll muddy the waters. And there was literally a darkening of their skin in this letter to say they're not quite white yet. And I'm also aware that in Quebec, a predominantly French province, uh, there are people that have had the experience of growing up in a French community, but the store owner being an English speaking. And they would be speaking French as they came in to the store, and the store owner would tell them to speak white, not speak English, but to speak white. And so there was a sense that they were not white. So it again, it keeps changing. And my own son, who is both Indigenous and white, known as Métis, he could pass as white when he was with my husband and I. And because of the amount of racism he saw against other Indigenous people within the school system, he would try and keep that a secret as much as possible. And even though there was elders that would come to his high school every week to do smudging, he did not want to be a part of it. I'm very thankful that now he's reclaiming that part of himself as well, through the help of his fiancée, who's Soto and Cree, and yeah. So whiteness is always changing, but it's basically giving power to people with lighter skin.
So you mentioned allies several times, and the changes have come through work that some allies have done. So tell us, how do we become an ally?
Well, one thing is the title is not something you could just put on. It's actually working with people who are asking you to be an ally. So the first thing to do is start getting involved. And if you consider yourself white, we have a lot of work to do. Like, we have work to figure out, to be able to see our white privilege, to see the things that we're not meant to see. And we need to be willing to listen. And the big thing as part of the process of becoming an ally is recognizing racism is more about impact than it is about intent. So if we get into dialogue about racial issues, especially with people who are most impacted, and they say to us, you know, what you just said was kind of racist. If we really want to be an ally, then we have to say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Could you please tell me more about what I said and what the impact was on you? And even if they are quoting back different words than what you said, leave it because it's what they heard. So it may not have been the words we said, but it might have been the tone, it might have been the way we just stood. And we need to learn what that impact is on another. And so I will admit, I'm loving seeing a number of people that are going out to rallies, especially Black Lives Matter rallies recently. But my fear is that for those who are going to a rally for the first time and saying, yes, we need to change this world, that there's a sense that I've done my work once I've gone to the rally. And so for me, that's a big thing to be watching for. The rally is only kind of a first step. It's a way of getting education. It's a way of hearing stories, but it's also an invitation so that we can be starting to watch the systems that we're a part of, the systems we're in, to start challenging them.
So this could be very uncomfortable, of course. So when we notice that discomfort, how do we stay present? How do we stay connected to ourselves and to the other person that we're communicating with? What suggestions do you have?
Well, there's a few. One is how to just kind of breathe and not just react to the discomfort. Part of whiteness, and there's kind of markers of a culture of white supremacy where lighter skin gets more privilege, more power. And one of those markers is the right to comfort. We don't want to see people hurt. So part of whiteness is trying to comfort ourselves and trying to say, I don't want to feel this way. Could we just stop the conversation because it's bothering me too much? Well, there may be a time to say, can I take a pause and say, I just need to process some of what's going on inside of me, but not to ask racialized folks, people who are deemed not white, to be my resource, to be my teacher, as opposed to us finding in ourselves the strength to be able to stay in the conversation. So I would say breathe. I would say feel really grounded. I would also say become curious. Because if we're feeling discomfort, we're having our awareness raised as to what we're a part of. So if we can become curious about our discomfort and then ask the people of the stories we're hearing or the kind of information that's being shared to say, could you tell me more? Like I'm recognizing I'm feeling this discomfort and maybe this is the first time I'm hearing this. This is something you deal with every day. Tell me more about what that experience is like. Yeah, so I would say part of the sitting in the discomfort is also recognizing it's not about me. It's about the people that are impacted by this structure. And I'll also say, I feel a bit odd being interviewed because I'm a white person who does this work. Now, I always do this work with a co-facilitator in Canada. I'm blessed by the people I get to work with, and they identify as racialized or indigenous or biracial, and I believe my work is really to amplify their voices, to help them be heard, and to amplify the voices of the people I'm teaching who are impacted by this, who know this because it's what they deal with every day.
And you also said that there's more than words. I mean, words have a impact, but it could be a way that we stand, a way that we express ourselves, the way that we say the words. So how do we embody the change that we want to see if we don't know what that change is?
Well, and part of it is, how do we be aware of kind of the shape that others have taken who are impacted? Um, and for instance, I learned through another course that I was part of a woman sharing a story of how she does somatic work of finding your full length, your full width, your full depth, and to be able to kind of experience that, often standing up. And she was leading uh, a centering practice to help people find that. And there was one tall black man in her course who, when he did this, he passed out. And she was like, "Oh my God, what did I do? What did I do?" And the next day, when that man came back, he talked about, I talked about this with my family. Since the age of 11, I believe, he was like well over 6 feet, 6'5", and he was warned, you're going to intimidate people. You're going to scare people just because you're black and you're tall. And so he spent most of his life making himself shorter. And so um, he believes that when he was asked to do this, to find his full height, that he was so shaped in this form that his body didn't know how to get the blood that high. And that was the reason he passed out. Now, as she described that, I started watching my son, who is also 6'2". And she says, often people who are worried about sticking out, and again, this happens more if you're impacted by racism, uh, that they often do make themselves smaller. And it tends to be looking down all the time, kind of slouching down, kind of trying to meet other people on their height. Um, and so, uh, again, I'm becoming more aware of how his experience is so different than mine. So embodying it for me is also understanding what they're experiencing. And again, how do I invite a shape that can be present, that can allow somebody else to be fully themselves? Um, and and for me, there's also an embodiedness of really paying attention, of looking around. I have also heard it described that if you grow up in Canada or the US as a racialized person, you're constantly monitoring who's watching. And so part of embodying it is to bring that awareness and just kind of notice, in my case, who's not watching me, but kind of who they are watching. So to become more aware. Um, I have one friend here in the city who has an Indigenous granddaughter, and she described to me that, she'll be going shopping with her. She's like 9 or 10 years old, and she's at the till and she realizes she forgot one item. So she tells her to go and get it from aisle whatever. But almost every time her granddaughter goes, she watches another sales clerk leave their post, or a staff employee, to follow her granddaughter, where it's not happening to other kids. So embodying is kind of being present to all that's happening around us. to kind of start being alert and questioning, um, and then to challenge it, just as my friend does. She speaks to the teller and says, you know, what need did you have to follow my granddaughter? She was with me, she's getting one item and coming back to me. So it's also just challenging what we're starting to see that we might have been blind to before.
Mm.
The other piece about embodiment is to recognize, you were describing these kind of conversations, this awareness can be very uncomfortable. So how do we hold that discomfort in a way that we're still aware of it when we're not in that conversation, but in another experience? So that it again can help us to continue to be curious.
Thank you, Brian. I know you have a list of resources that we're going to be giving out, so thank you for that. And I think that's it.